Dear friends, dear Sangha, good morning. This is our Zazen Kai for March of 2021. It is great to see so many of you here. I hope you are looking forward to spring and the warmer days ahead. It's a beautiful day here, sunny day. It's still very cold, but you can sort of smell the spring in the air. So it's something to look forward to. For today's Teisho, I would like to continue the discussion that we had started last month on the relationship between meditation practice, Koan practice, and development of wisdom. If you remember, last time I talked about some of the pitfalls and unique aspects of meditation practice that we find in Zen. What is unique about Zen approach to developing wisdom and meditation? To start, I want to mention a few words regarding the communication in Zen and why Zen tradition is suspicious of the use of concepts or overly relying on conceptual constructs. I think this will be a natural entry point into the topic that I want to discuss today, but I don't want you to lose sight of the real subject matter of the talk today, and that is meditation practice and how to practice meditation well. Why is Zen suspicious of concepts? I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with using concepts. It is what we do as human beings. It's what makes us human, after all. I'm not an expert on neuroscience behind it and the development of language and so on. But from my personal point of view and experience with meditation practice and with the Dharma, the trouble comes because we are unable to translate the conceptual understanding into actual understanding. In other words, the concepts serve as a map, which is very useful to us. We need to have a map to orient ourselves in the physical world. And the way we develop language and the way we develop thought, this is really our, we can say, competitive advantage for human species, the way we can process information in the real world. But it has come to the point where we are unable to translate that, understanding into actual understanding. What I mean is, if you take this idea of a map, this metaphor of a map, it's almost as if we live within a map. We are unable to look at the map and then put it aside and step into a physical reality. It almost seems like that when I look at the struggle that we have in how to be present and how to actually live a meaningful life. It seems that we are so, this level of abstraction that is necessary in simplifying things, this conceptual level of abstraction which is a great advantage, somehow seems to be also a hindrance in some ways. So we are always warned against or relying on concepts and conceptual understanding if we wish to understand ourselves and what in Zen, what we call a Buddha nature or essential world. I think what we need to do is to take the map as a map and take whatever is useful there and be able to translate that into actual life. So then this question is very important. How do we communicate in Zen if we are suspicious of concepts? And so we have developed a certain kind of, I would like you to think of as a sign language. Right now I'm talking to you and you're listening to my words and everything is purely conceptual. But I want you to imagine that this is not just a verbal exchange. There's actually kind of a sign language happening at the same time. Originally, in the Zen tradition, the communication mainly involved kind of pithy statements and just the presence of the teachers. We can't really, when you look at those descriptions of the encounters in the koans, Zen koans, it's difficult for us to really live those encounters because we don't have a physical presence in front of us. And we know that the big part of communication, it's not just what we hear, but also all the non-verbal aspects of it. So if I just take the example of the first case of Mumonkan, and you're all familiar with it, when the Zen master Joshu is asked, does a dog have Buddha nature? And he replied, Mu. The only thing that remains is his word, but that whole presentation of Joshu is missing. And I think a big part of communication is that non-verbal aspect. So this is how it started. And then in the Tang dynasty, which is mainly the period where most of the koans come from, in the Song dynasty of China, when I say we, I meant Zen tradition, developed poetry as a means of expressing. So we are trying to use poetry as a way of going beyond the words and all that just words entail. When it comes to Japan, even that, by the time Zen got to Japan, even the use of poetry became kind of stale. And not everybody, of course, can be very skillful in writing poetry as a way of expressing the truth of Zen. So then we developed this technique of dokusans, in which we are beginning to use not just the words, but the gestures. And the Zen developed its own language, the language of the dokusan, as a way of trying to bridge that gap between a landscape and a map. That's what we are trying to do when we are communicating in dokusan. We are trying to bridge that gap between purely a map, which may be very useful, and the actual life, the actual landscape of our lives. So this is important for us to keep in mind when anytime we are trying to communicate. we have to be aware of the limitations. When we are talking about meditation practice and wisdom practice, we have to be aware of the limitations of language. So as you can see today, I'm talking about this intersection between meditation, wisdom, and Koan practice and dokusan practice. So now I'm going to share a couple of texts as an example of maps that we were given. Each koan, in essence, is a map. So there are many examples, but I just picked a few examples to give you an idea. And this is a beautiful text that you may or may not be familiar with. I will read this to you now. A Buddha said, I consider the position of kings and rulers as that of dust motes. I observe treasures of gold and gems as so many bricks and pebbles. I look upon the finest silken robes as tattered rags. I see myriad worlds of the universe as small seeds of fruit, and the greatest lake in India as a drop of oil on my foot. I perceive the teachings of the world to be illusion of magicians. I discern the highest conception of liberation as a golden brocade in a dream, and view the holy path of the saints as flowers appearing in one's eyes. I see meditation as a pillar of a mountain, nirvana as a nightmare of daytime. I look upon the judgment of right and wrong as the serpentine dance of a dragon, and the rise and fall of beliefs as but traces left by the four seasons. So this is one such map that we can follow in our meditation practice. Another example I'd like to give you is a text you're all familiar with, and this is the Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra. I'm not going to read the whole sutra, but this is something we recite frequently. And it begins by saying, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, practicing deep Prajnaparamita, clearly saw that all five skandhas are empty, transforming all suffering and distress, and so on, and continues. This is another such map. And lastly, as a third example, I will read, this is Anthology of Zen Poetry, Zen Verse, and this is, those of you who are familiar with Sambo Zen curriculum will be familiar with this. It's just 4 lines, a poem. Lotus leaves are round, rounder than a mirror. Water chestnut thorns are sharp, sharper even than a gimlet. Wind blows the willow catkins and woolly puffs sail away. Rain strikes the pear blossoms and butterflies take flight. This is another such map, Zen map. We don't know, I'm at least not familiar, the author of this last poem. Of course, in the Heart Sutra, it is the map, you can say, drawn by the Bodhisattva of compassion. So there's one thing we can notice right away, and this is integral to understanding what is going on in the dokusan and what is the approach, Zen approach, to developing wisdom. And here, if I go back to the first text, it says, Buddha said, I consider the position of kings and rulers as that of dust motes. One thing we can see right away is that this is a testimony. This is eyewitness account. He is giving us his own, he's testifying to something. And this is very important. in the Heart Sutra, this is a testimony. This is an eyewitness account of Bodhisattva of compassion. Since there's nothing to attain, the Bodhisattva lives by prajna paramita, with no hindrance in the mind, no hindrance, and therefore no fear, and so on. This is a testimony. This is an eyewitness account of Bodhisattva of compassion. So then this is the crucial element when we are talking about communication and what is taking place in dokusan. What has to take place is a testimony. A student has to testify to something. They have to testify to their own understanding, their own experience, their own living quality of their Zen. We cannot testify to somebody else's experience. When monk asked Joshu, does a dog have Buddha nature? Joshu is not quoting somebody else when he says moo. This is a testimony. This is eyewitness account, direct. So this is something that all of us as students of Zen have to do every time we step into dokusan room. In some way, we have to embody the essential Zen experience and then find a way to communicate that in some way. So now this question arises, how do we do that? How do we embody the essential Zen experience? And obviously the answer is through meditation practice. This is a Zen way, after all. And now we are coming back to that old question. How do we actually practice meditation? If we wish to be able to testify to something, we have to have our own experience. We have to experience certain truths so that we can communicate them. And in order to do that, we have to know how to meditate. And maybe it is not such an easy thing to either practice or master. You remember in the last talk, I basically said that Koan practice is meditation practice. So now I am thinking, I'm trying to draw another map, in other words, yet another map to help us meditate. How do we meditate? If you remember, I said one of my recent Teishos that I'm regretting that meditation is not something that I can teach through saying, okay, you have to do this, then you have to do that, then you have to do that. It seems that there's this quality to meditation that's really hard to teach. Sometimes maybe when something comes natural to us, and I'm not saying that I'm somebody to whom meditation comes naturally, but when something comes natural to us, it's very hard for us to teach. If we haven't learned it through following certain fixed steps like baking bread or any skill, it's very difficult to teach. So the best I can tell you is what I need in order to meditate. And I know that I need a quiet space and I need quiet time. I need to create time and space in which I can meditate. course, that's not the only thing, but maybe that's the most that we can do for each other. And that's what we are trying to do today, is in this Zazenkai that is on Zoom, but nevertheless, we are trying to create time and space in which to meditate, which is maybe the first prerequisite. And in this attempt to make another map, I thought, what it is that I'm really doing? How can I communicate this? And this kind of image came into my mind of a mind as a sail, like on a sailing boat, a big ship, let's say, a big giant sail. And normally, our mind, our sails, so to speak, they're folded. It's folded down. What I mean by this, anything that's causing us some kind of strain, discomfort, tension, mental tension, anxiety, mental fatigue, it's in this particular metaphor, it is as if the mind is folded down on itself. It's not open. It's not wide open in order to feel the breeze. In this case, the breeze would be the breeze of the essential world. So I would like to say meditation is like unfurling of the mind. You unfurl it completely. So, and then you can feel this breeze of the essential world. You can catch, you can sense the breeze of mood, let's say. Let's say you're working on that particular koan. And so from the perspective of teaching meditation, we can't really say how to do that, how to unfurl your mind like a sail. But what we can say is what sort of things are causing us to tighten up. We are folded, where our mind is folded down, and it's not, doesn't have the capacity to catch the breeze. And we have spoken at length about those kind of things. Any kind of aggression, any form of different forms of prejudices, anything that's causing the mind not to be at ease. This is why a big part of meditation practice, what we need is a peace, a peaceful environment and a peaceful state of minds. And gradually, as our anxieties lessen, we can allow ourselves to open up more and more and more. That's how it feels to me, you see. So how do you translate that into action as a student of Zen? How do you actually, by sitting on the cushion, translate that from that conceptual idea of unfurling your mind to actually doing that? This is a task that we have to do on the cushion. In this sense, the ease, the peace of mind, the ease of mind is sort of a guidance. You can be guided by how relaxed and how at ease you are when you're meditating. Less tense, there's tension, there's some cramping is going on, easier it will be to unfurl the mind. So this expanse, opening up, and this spaciousness that comes with when we are opened up like that is where we'll find the truth. And then from that place, you can testify. to something. And from that place, you communicate in some way. And this is what is meant to take place during dokusan. I will just go back to this text of Shakyamuni Buddha. You can see how he's speaking from such a place. I see nirvana as a nightmare of daytime. I look upon the judgment of right and wrong as a serpentine dance of the dragon, and the rise and fall of beliefs as but traces left by the four seasons. Normally, our beliefs are something that's very precious to us, right and wrong. These are all the kind of things that cause our minds to be folded on itself. It's not really able to unfurl itself. So this is one map that I can give you that you can try to follow and see if you can translate words into actual experience. There's another attempt we can do, which is maybe easier. It's difficult to do this because we simply don't even know where to start, except by saying, try to relax, work on the ease of mind, try to let go of all anxieties and all things which cause us tension and strain. But there's another way that we can begin to open up, which is maybe more relatable, and that's through the use of compassion and loving kindness, because these things in themselves, in order for them to flow, they need that kind of openness. And this is something that we all know, because as normal human being, there are times when you naturally, organically have experienced compassion and loving kindness. So it's something, because we have already some personal experience with those things, we can use that to cultivate those things. And by doing so, we are unfurling the mind in a way. And when it is unfurled, it will experience the breeze of the essential world. And so now I want to go back to that. There was a reason why I quoted those Zen verses. And in what way was that another map? It just seems to be a description of lotus leaves are round, water chestnut thorns are sharp, wind blows through the willows, rain strikes the pear blossoms. When the mind is unfurled like a big sail, it allows us to appreciate things. It allows us to appreciate what is already there. This is wisdom. Simply a pear blossom. This is what wisdom looks like if the mind is unfurled. A sound of raindrops. This is what wisdom sounds like. Somebody might see a branch waving in the wind. Somebody might see a dandelion blooming by the roadside. This is what wisdom looks like. So this is a very clear map. But can we translate that into actual experience is what we are struggling with. I'm looking forward to a day when I can open this window here and sit with the window open and listen to the rain. Perhaps in another couple of weeks. So to be able to appreciate is really important aspect of Zen practice. It means to be awake. I was thinking about another thing, in which way we are still children and not really mature adults. If you were lucky enough as a child to have had a happy childhood, at the time, of course, we are not aware what happiness is as a child growing up. We can't really appreciate it, in other words, as it is taking place. And that is no different than right now. As adults, it's only when we lose something that we can maybe appreciate it. We really haven't grown up. If we don't know how to appreciate what we have right now, what is staring us in the face right now, what we are living through right now, if we don't know how to appreciate that, then we're really just like children. We need to create space and time in which we can do this, in which we can develop our ability to appreciate things, in which we can testify to the beauty of spring rain. So there's just one other thing that I want to mention to end this Dharma talk, because I want to call this talk, I had a title in mind. Somebody in the dokusan recently, somebody mentioned the game of charades. And then a couple of days later, I watched Robin's art installation video where she's using the game of charades as part of her art project. So I thought this is really interesting because in a way, this is just a game of charades, in a sense that we are trying to communicate something and we are finding it difficult to communicate it fully, directly. And it can lead to a lot of frustration on the part of a student and a part of a teacher. The longer we engage in this game, more frustrated we can become. So it's important to know that. It is interesting that there's a Buddhist story, part of Buddhist mythology, that after Shakyamuni Buddha's enlightenment, he was discouraged. He wasn't going to teach. He thought, nobody will understand. I will just heap pain and suffering and difficulties on myself if I try to tell anybody about the kind of things I have discovered. So goes the Buddhist story. And then he was encouraged. It says the gods came down from heaven and encouraged him to teach Dharma. And then he thought, this is another thing he's testifying to. He said that I thought there are some people in the world who are clear and who will understand. And then this game of charades began, and it's been going on for 2,500 years already. And we know an example of Zen Master Rinzai, he used to shout, he never stopped shouting. Zen Master Takusan used to use his stick. And so it goes like that. So we're doing what we can. We're trying to communicate the best way we can. Sometimes silence is, we're using silence as a means of communication, creating space, creating times in which these things can arise in your own minds. And then you can testify to them yourselves. So this was my Dharma talk for today, my Teisho for today. We will continue with our day of meditation.